Super massive thank you to our sponsors. Please click the links in the description below.
It would be a bit of an effort to push it through, but because it's so heavy, that's a very common style of Japanese geometry. Filming. Hi, anyway.
Hello, mate.
Hello. Good timing. Well, may as well put this one to side. I'll give it one heat cycle. Give it one little heat cycle. At this stage, I'm just making sure everything's tough and soft enough to it's like to make sure the grain is refined, so it's fairly tough and that everything's fairly softened. I mean, it's best finished off with a full anneal if you're going to do cold forging, but I know from experience that 3 heat cycles is adequate for these materials, so the straightness is not even that important. I'm just want to see everything's. It's easier to see it's all right when it's straight. Because once I've profiled it, remove the scale, I'll cold forge it, and that will give it its nice final finish and actually the final dimensions. Just sort of tweak the dimensions. In terms of, by the dimensions, I mean in terms of like, you know, what does it measure there? Is it pretty even going through that level? Stuff like that. So I tune all that. And you can just get the finish in even on both sides. So this kind of deep hollowing is pretty even. Yeah, I'm going to do a different knife. I'm going to try just a little challenge to myself to see if I can get something fairly equivalent to these dimensions, but a much heavier knife. So I'm going to make it thicker everywhere, really. Hopefully we'll have 2 finished knives that show the same principle of geometry, but that you can kind of increase the weight and you can increase the dimensions all around because it'll fall through stuff. It's got more weight behind it. Cut slightly differently, but it's a nice, 2 very nice geometries, basically. Yeah, we're doing 2 in 2 different geometries. And it's forged down very, very thin, about 1 mil thick down there. This is, you know, blown up. And then I'm going to do a heavy version. I was sort of drawing a Japanese geometry here, but it'll be a lot thicker down there and the knife will carry a lot more weight. And providing you've got a very convex and super thin at the edge, it really cuts really nicely. They both cut really nicely, but in slightly different ways. So that's what I'm going to do. It's quite challenging. It's the first time I've tried to forge a heavy knife on these dies, so we'll see how we go. Allow more material, that's the key. There's so many different things that can go wrong, aren't there? I mean, it could delaminate, it could, especially with this one. It's more likely that we get a problem on heat treat with this one. But I am, you know, I'm not at the stage with these new dies where I don't occasionally fuck the forging up on these now. Like 8 years on those dies, I could kind of do it blindfolded, but I'm at a new stage of learning still on these. So I'm going to forge the tip. Okay. Come on, baby. Oh, that's a good tip forging. Warmed up now. That's going to be quite a long tip forging. That's after I'm warmed up. So start the taper. Yeah, I can feel this material it doesn't yield its carbon steel on the outwell. Low carbon steel, you can feel it. But that'll help keep the thickness in this one as well. Less yield. Okay. See how much of that I can correct. That's where this hammer's quite good, is correcting that first little. Yeah, it's corrected it quite well, you see. It's like, almost like a hand hammer. Saves me a bit of effort trying to straighten it on the anvil. It's basically just correcting that, because I put a little bit of the geometry in and it kicked it up. So I was using, there's a nice thing about this hammer, you can kind of get an almost hammer-like pad with it for doing things on edge and stuff, which has been a bit of a treat so far. So I'll go in, and because I was able to do that, I can do this again now. Going to do one more just to get that tip down, pull out. It's looking good though, isn't it? It's nice having a bit more material to work with actually. Might have to have a chunky stage. For just reducing everything really thin, but obviously you want to keep it thick in the right places, which is the tricky bit. But yeah, I'd say it's two different geometries. It's just proportionate to weight. So if you get a great big heavy thing, you can have sort of more geometry, if you like, slightly thicker, lower geometry. Help me correct it a little bit. Still fiddling with it. I think I'm going to just carry on and forge the geometry in. That'll help it. I just don't like it when there's a lump. Remember on the other one, I sort of put everything roughly where it wants to be and then put the tang in. That normally helps keep everything straight. In this case, we ended up with a bit of a lump. But, and I just continue to put the geometry in there. Yeah, looking good. Bit of evening to do on the spine. really good. All the essentials are there. Before I go much further, I need to clean that one up. So you've got a bit of a bulge in the heel and it'll clean up really nicely. I think we need to grind this one back a bit. A couple of heat cycles, just so in case it needs it, and then grind them back a bit. I'd do it on weights. So I'd say allow 450 grams for a sort of material for a larger gyuto. You've got a kind of idea then. And if you're doing, say, 10, then you're doing the same series of processes as well. So yeah, it's nice to be able to forge more individually as they feel, as they often without measuring anything. It's a nice way to forge. We were talking about it being an opposite thing we were going for, weren't we? When I'm making that material out of carbon steel and wrought, which is what wants to be a sort of a form of Damascus, it's hopefully going to end up looking a bit like Tamahange style material. I want the carbon to be really even, so I'm using long heat. Maybe I'll only do 4 folds, but I'll do really long heats and make sure all the carbon diffuses into the material. Whereas when we were actually welding up the same material with the carbon core, I'm sort of trying to restrict much movement of the carbon from the core then into the cladding, because we want to keep it in the core. So, I'm not doing heats longer than I need to do just to weld the material together. And then, if you remember, we drew it out pretty quickly. So that's sort of the goal of weld it, make sure it's really well welded, and then draw it out as quickly as possible. And hopefully that's the last time that it'll need to be a welding heat, so to speak. Pretty quick, yeah. That's where the Anyang excels, really, drawing out stock. It's very common in most Japanese style knife making. For me, it's just about getting that final little dimensions correct, especially on the more aggressive tooling. You can move the material quite a lot, enough to take out any defects in the surface finish. That last sort of half mil of up to, you can move it quite a lot, enough so it's changing you have to basically go through all the same processes to end up with a straight blade, because if you just went in on that bit, it's going to end up kicking up that way. So you're going through all the same processes. Like I'll work the center of the knife, work down into the bevel, and then it'll be kicked up that way a bit, and then I'll work up the spine, even it all in, and it'll end up approximately the same shape. In blacksmithing, you're trained to finish on dull red heats. You pause, get as much scale off as you can, and finish on a dull red heat for surface finish, and you're not hammering scale in and stuff like that. So really, it's the same principle as that for me. It's a useful tool. It does other things. So say you've got a soft clad material, it will move the soft clad material considerably more than the tougher carbon steel core when you do it cold. So you can use it to, increase the proportion of core to cladding, and that's a useful thing. There's an element of grain refinement, and that's definitely something that happens. But personally, I believe the modern steels, they're as refined as they're going to be from sort of 3 heat cycles anyway. So it's not personally a matter of grain refinement for me. It doesn't hurt. But I tend to heat cycle anyway, because they're that thin. If you've cold forged it and then not heat cycled it again, then you're going to have different tensions in there, and you're going to get warps. So I tend to heat cycle, and then it'll stay a lot straighter. Surface quench, shocks the scale off it. Works quite well. Exactly, yeah, you avoid sort of overly thick scaling. A little bit of scale pop off there because there's a little bit of water on the anvil. It looks good. Give the very last little bit of the edge a go under there.
We will be finishing Will's knife with some cold forging, talk about his new woodworking handle making process, and a variety of really cool stuff. So make sure you subscribe and be one of the first people to know when the new video is out. Check out Will's website on the links in the description below. Thank you guys, and see you in the next video.